transformation is an emotional event, not a mental event. And so if like in a lot of traditional therapies, we analyze what has happened in the past that was painful, and the nervous system gets better and better at going into a fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response. And it gets worse and worse at accessing a parasympathetic response, which is where we experience like love and tranquility and joy and inspiration and all the things that we aspire to. If we can access joy right now today, and we can do that a little bit more tomorrow, and we can, add another minute the next day, the more we feel joyful, the more we're going to feel joyful. The more we feel joy, the more we train joy. Get clear on the picture of the relationship you want, have the courage to name it, have the courage to believe that it's going to happen, and that future reality is not only a possibility, but it's highly likely for you. The number one thing that destroys relationships, what I've learned over 20 years, there's three key things, is
Reagan Archibald here. Today, I've invited my good friend Joey Klein back to talk about the new project he's been working on. And you're going to want to listen to this podcast probably 2, maybe 3 times, because one of the most valuable things you can do in your life is improve your relationships. And there's no one better than Joey to talk about this, because not only has he cultivated a great relationship with himself, but he's also helped train over 84,000 people worldwide in his inner matrix system since 2002. Joey, for those of you who don't know, he wrote the Inner Matrix. It's a phenomenal book. I'm a client of his, a friend of his, and have gone deep into the journey with him as to how he was able to unpack this whole world of kind of what we would consider esoteric natures of humans. And he has brought in the science, but also he's got some real practical skills. And so what Joey is, he's a transformational and mastery expert. He's an author, speaker. He's the founder and CEO of Inner Matrix System. And many of our clients actually utilize this. Actually, many of the team members here at East West Health are members of his program. They do the work, they do the training, they understand. His newest book is called Relationship Alchemy, a practical guide to getting along well with others. Now, a lot of you are very hard for me to get along with, and that's why I asked Joey to come on to train me how to get along well with you. And so I think you're going to enjoy this. And we'll talk a little bit more about how he got to where he is today and where he's going with his phenomenal life-changing work. So, Joey, welcome back to Unreasonable Health.
Hey man, thanks for having me. It's always fun to drive with you.
Man, well, the honor's all mine. And last time you were on, we went deep into the Inner Matrix System. But one thing that happened is we're able to spend more time together. And that's one of my goals in life, is to spend as much time as I can with really fascinating humans who are, making a big change in the world. But the thing that stood out to me is the word courage, because you found yourself in a ditch. I mean, you were hard charging as a teenager, left the house early, had a lot of emotional distress in your life. But maybe you could just paint the picture for people about your personal transformation.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's interesting because like so many people that I meet today, they'll come up to me, they're like, oh, I want to be a coach, and I want to change the lives of other people. And I think that's awesome and admirable. But like for me, I didn't set out to work with anybody. Like I had no desire to like teach, coach, or train anybody. Matter of fact, when my mentor started asking me to train others, I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, why in the world would I want to do that? And now it's like, my favorite thing on the planet. And so I came to this by way of really just figuring it out or looking for my own answers. Grew up in a very, difficult household. Very, very low emotional intelligence, right? Like it was a really, really hard circumstance. And, I didn't have any mentors around me. I grew up in this little tiny town, in the middle of nowhere. And so it was like there was nobody to aspire to. There was like no individuals I could look at and be like, oh, that's how you produce wealth, or that's how you should be healthy, or that's how humans should interact with each other. Like there was a lot of yelling and screaming and just kind of like nonsense like that going on in my environment. And so I couldn't wait to get out of the house. So when I was at 17, I lied about my age, and I was working 2 jobs as I kind of wrapped up high school. And I found this place that I could afford. And so like we moved out, my best friend and I, and we kind of got our own place. And I've been on my own ever since I was 17, because I was like, the pain of going back home was so great. It was kind of like I had to succeed. But unfortunately, I had no tools in the beginning. And so got hard into partying and just kind of going crazy. And really almost killed myself several times. And I remember it was like probably 3 or 4 in the morning one day. And I was like, man, I need to stop the way I'm living, because I'm gonna be dead in a year if I don't do something different. The drugs and the alcohol and, driving fast and just like all this crazy stuff. And so I moved out the next day and I was like, I need to figure out how to get myself together. And so I started looking for mentors, and ultimately, I found, a spiritual mentor who's like a guru from India. And I found a world-renowned psychologist from Beverly Hills who ended up moving me out to LA to work with kind of her high profile clients. That's how I kind of got started. And she introduced me to a Harvard trained neurologist so that I could understand how the brain worked with the inner training that I learned from some of my spiritual mentors. And then, Dr. Lou trained me inside of psychology and kind of how all that fit into it. And then I had a background in traditional martial arts that was very steeped in, kind of like mindfulness techniques and meditation, as well as like conditioning and training the body. And so I really, had these, true masters in these different fields of personal development that almost never intersect with each other. And they really helped me create the formula and the system that I teach and train today. But most important, like when I set out, I was like, man, I just need to figure out how to be, happy and fulfilled in life. Like, how do I get myself together? Because I was aware of how unhealthy I was because of my conditioning, my upbringing. And I just really wanted to be like, in my mind, I was like, man, how do I just be normal? And then ultimately, not only was I able to kind of figure out how to be what I thought of as healthy and normal at the time, but I figured out how to really thrive, which has been awesome.
You were working on a car. I mean, your brothers, you have older brothers, and maybe you could talk about the thing you learned about relationships is what doesn't make them work. And the story you told on the car. I mean, when Joey was younger, he started taking martial arts, and maybe you could just tell people how you just set the boundary with your brothers. I mean, it was pretty badass.
Yeah, it scared me. That's for sure. That definitely scared me. So it's interesting because, like, I grew up around a lot of violence, in my household, and I had 2 older brothers. They're actually my half brothers, so they were, 12 and like 16 years older than me. And so if you think about that age disparity, when you're like 5, it's impossible to defend yourself against your teenage brothers who just tortured me and suffocated me with pillows and just beat on me relentlessly. And then finally I was like, man, I need to figure out how to make it stop. That's why I joined martial arts. Like there was this, martial arts studio, an Okinawan Kempo school by my house that I could kind of walk to. And I begged my parents to sign me up, and they did. And so, for a lot of kids, they were just doing it because it was this fun after school activity. And for me, I was like, I need to get good at this to make the beating stop, essentially. And so my brothers came into town and we were all in the garage, and I was working on my Mustang and, fixing the car up. And then, here the both of them come. And at this point, I'm probably 15, 16, and they're in their late 20s. And they just start punching me and poking at me and pinching me. And I was like, and I just had a bad day. And I remember I was like, guys, just not today. Leave me alone. Like, I'm not in the mood. Like, this is not a good day for this. And then they're like, oh, Joey, the big man. And then I don't know what happened, but I remember I just snapped. And I did a front leg sweep on my eldest brother. His name's Jimmy. And I grabbed the back of his head and I was about to put it into the side of my Mustang. And I stopped his face about an inch from from the fender because I like realized what I was doing because I almost kind of blacked out and just reflexively, did this martial arts technique. And then I like picked him up and I put him down. I go, would you please stop? And they both had these huge eyes of like horror, like, oh my God, Joey just did that. And then they looked at each other and then they never spoke we never spoke another word about it, but they never touched me again. Like they never bullied me. They never did anything because they were like, okay, the dude is clearly more capable than he used to be. And that was the day where it was like, oh man, the beating stopped, which was great.
Yeah, I mean, it says a lot about your character though, because one thing you've done is you've had to cultivate an environment internally so that you could do things like that, so you could control that kind of that inner energy almost. I guess what was your emotional state at that time of life?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's like two things. Like, I mean, it was like I was fine. Like, if you asked me how I was, I'd be like, I'm fine. And then just like rage, like a blinding rage, or just angry all the time.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have known to tell you that at the time. But ultimately, my one of my first mentors introduced me to it. He's like, "Do you realize you have all these emotions that you don't have access to?" He's like, basically, when you talk, you're either fine or you're okay, or you're clearly angry, but you can't even identify that you're angry. But then you're like elbowing people in the face, literally. So there's clearly a problem. And at the time I was like, what do you mean? There's no problem. They deserve that elbow, right? They deserve to get hit. Like, what are you talking about? And this is like, cause I grew up, I call it in the wild jungle, where it was like, that was the only way, your personal safety was kind of going to be established. Like even in grade school, I went to this grade school. It's called Samba del Monte in New Mexico, in a little town in Albuquerque. And I was like one of the few white kids in the school. So I got really fast at recess because, I got chased and beat up a lot. And this was starting in like grade school. And I was little, I didn't clear 100 pounds until my sophomore year of high school. So I was like the
Whoa.
smallest kid, in the class as well, until I started lifting weights and training, and then, got a little bit bigger finally my sophomore year of high school. And so for me, this literally was like survival. Like it was like, well, if I don't exist this way in the world, then basically I'm gonna get tortured.
Yeah, man. And so fast forward today, I mean, you teach people the art of how to get along with others. And that's where you've worked with individuals. Over 84,000 people have been trained in your programs. And if you guys ever meet any of Joey's trainers, just they're the best humans on the planet. We just had Joy out, and we had such a great time. Lena has just like been amazing as far as her work goes. So it's not that Joey has kept it to himself. He actually learned how to transform his own emotions into productivity, and actually he's now talking about how to get along with others and relationship alchemy. So, what's the framework of relationship alchemy?
So I think, as many of us kind of know, I think it starts with ourselves. Like we got to get along well with us if we ever stand a chance at getting along really well with others and creating relationships that truly thrive. And I remember the first time, I started accessing this like sense of inner tranquility or peace studying with some of my mentors. And I remember thinking like, oh, I have everything. Right. I was like broke and living out of my car at the time. Cause I was like, I think I was 20 or 19 years old. Right. And I was kind of living with one of my first mentors. And I remember thinking like, oh, if I can access this inner sense of like peace and tranquility and like fulfillment, like I kind of have everything that I've ever wanted. And it was actually my mentor who was like, Joey, you got to go out and like make money, and you should probably share this with other people and start charging people, because people were just asking me for my advice and they just kept coming back. And he's like, instead of just giving all this advice for free that you've worked very hard to learn, he's like, just start charging a little money so you can kind of take care of yourself. And I was like, why? I feel great. I don't need any money. And he's like, well, I'd like you to not live on my couch for the rest of your life. So you should probably like, you should probably like figure out how to, manage yourself well. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And so what I realized was like, I had a capacity that very few people did, where I learned how to regulate my emotional self, where it was like, I could do three core things that I find most people have difficulty with or don't realize is trainable around emotional competency. And those three things are like, number one is like emotional resilience. I developed that through martial arts. I developed that through the deep inner trainings that I did with my mentors and things like this. Like I spent time, 8 hours a day meditating in India and stuff like this for months at a time and all this kind of crazy stuff. And I realized it cultivated and trained a high level of emotional resilience where it was like I could do three things. Like number one, I could maintain an emotion despite hardship around me. And
Yeah.
so like when I'm running my business or, life challenges occur or, something challenges going on with a family member or something like this, I found I could hold a state of like, sense of like peace or compassion or even a sense of like inner joyfulness, even though challenging times were there, right? Like I remember sitting in my condo in LA when I was first getting started and, often I'd be like, I don't know how I'm gonna pay the rent. Like I'm gonna be $300 short. And like, I remember I had the thing set up where I was like, okay, here's what'll fit in my car if I need to move out and I can't figure out how to come up with the money. Luckily, I always did. But even though in those moments, I realized like I had this sense of like peace and this sense of just sort of like inspiration for the life I was living. And I just kind of knew where I was going, despite sometimes facing some really challenging things. And so like that first level of resilience was maintaining, a love-based state or a high emotional experience despite challenging circumstances. And then the second thing that I noticed I cultivated, and I think this was through my martial arts training, because my master had this sense of like, hey, no excuses is how he called it. And basically what that meant was you're going to show up and train like no matter what. You were expected to be there at 8 a.m. 6 days a week. And we trained 4 hours a day. And it was like you had 102-degree temperature, you showed up and trained. If you had, a broken limb, you had three other good limbs. Like you showed up and trained. Like that was the mentality. And what I noticed was a lot of times I didn't want to show up and train, obviously, but it was like I felt terrible emotionally, like I might feel sad or lonely or overwhelmed or fear, things like this. But I could get myself to show up and execute despite the emotions. So that was kind of the second form of emotional resilience, was managing high levels of emotional discomfort and being able to execute on the task anyway, whether it was a show up and go to the dojo or build my business or show up for people I cared about the way I wanted to, and so on. And then kind of the third element of emotional resilience was, being able to access or shift state. And so if I noticed I was anxious or I noticed I was overwhelmed or, when I noticed I was angry, as opposed to going into the reflexes that got conditioned in me for many years where I would lash out and literally sometimes be physically, attack somebody, it's like, oh, I could find center and then redirect to a love-based state in a way that it was almost like a light switch. Like I could go, oh, I feel anxious and get to a place of inspiration or, create a pathway for that. Or like go, hey, I feel, a sense of, loneliness and get to a place of feeling connection or a sense of, peace within myself. And so it was like, I realized, if we do the right techniques, that was all trainable. So like the first aspect of, if we think of relationship dynamics is truly learning to manage the first aspect of relationship, which is ourself. And so much of that has to do with creating emotional competency, which then translates to being able to set expectations and then uphold those expectations with the right boundaries. So that's like first aspect. Second aspect is the relationship itself. Like two humans are putting energy into the relationship, emotional energy, and we're thinking about the other person. So we're putting thought energy into the relationship, and then we're talking, right? So the things that we say is putting energy into this relationship, and then the things we do, the actions we take, are also putting something into the relationship, regardless of the relationship, romantic or significant other or whatever. And then it's like those energies that are coming together from these two human beings, create a relationship. And the energy that we're feeding into the relationship almost creates this like entity of itself and the energy of a relationship. And it's kind of like some people, you think about them and it's like just thinking about them or just seeing them, you light up and you just kind of feel, fueled and filled by them and expansive. And then other people, like you just think about them or you see them and it's like we go into the deepest contraction within ourselves and we feel insecure and unworthy and angry and, all these kinds of things. And it's like, whoa, like different humans in our life can create or activate completely different experiences of ourself based on, what's being nurtured in the relationship. And so understanding the dynamics of relationship and they feed it such that it thrives is so very important. And knowing the rules of the game there, what are we responsible for? What are we not responsible for? And then the third aspect of relationship, obviously the other person, and understanding same thing, like, hey, there's this person showing up on the other side that in some ways we have absolutely no control over. Anybody who's like married or been in a significant, relationship with a significant other understands like the easiest way to make sure they don't do what you want is tell them to do it, right? It's like, hey, you really should clean the kitchen. And they're like, I'm not cleaning the kitchen for a year now, right? And it's like you realize very quickly you don't have control over this human being, but yet you have this profound influence over a person. And so understanding those subtleties of where do I have influence and can profoundly, have a positive effect on this person's life and the relationship we want to aspire to, but yet also understand, when we're out of our lane and we're not going to be able to control that other person. And so if we really understand these three elements of relationship, ourself, the relationship, and then the other person, and how to interact with each, you can really create thriving, outstanding relationships in every part of life, whether it's culture in a business, business partner, your boss, the dynamics are the same in all the different relationships, friendships, kids, whatever.
Man, well, and the powerful thing is starting with emotional resilience. So if you have not read Inner Matrix, get that book because that's what the whole work is about. And then when you can control your emotions, what do you find happens in relationships? Like, is there anything you've observed? Joey, by the way, if you guys ever get a chance to hang out with him, he's a deep observer. You're kind of like I wouldn't call it quiet, but you just kind of like a sage hanging out. And maybe that is, and that's what my wife noticed too. She's like, he's a great observer because you and her kind of function the same. You analyze the environment, you recognize the energies going on, and then you put your experience into that, which is really powerful. But what can people do? I mean, what happens when they actually manage their own emotions?
So in my opinion, it's like a superpower, and it's one that 1%, have in a true sense, because it's like, we all know we could do certain things. And like, if we look at specific to relationship and we get into a challenge in our relationship, usually what's always going to be there is going to be, some painful emotion that we're wrestling with. Mm-hmm. And we might look at it and go, oh, this person's, betrayed me, they had an affair and this is the cause of my pain 5 years later, or 3 years later, 1 year later. Obviously something like that is an extremely difficult situation to manage. And sure, it would be hurtful, but if we develop the skills, even in extenuating circumstances like an affair or, the loss of somebody that we love, right? Or, things that don't seem so, critical, like, it's so funny because like the number one thing that destroys relationships, what I've learned over 20 years, there's three key things, is like people will have differences of opinion around the children. Like that can be the challenge. Mm-hmm. The second is sex, right? That's a big one for couples for sure. And then the third one, honestly, is household chores. Like
no way, household chores.
Yeah, household chores. Like you didn't load the dishwasher right, and then that turns into like a whole thing. Or like, I do the laundry. Could you just put your sock in the hamper? Or like, why can't you park the car properly? I hang the tennis ball from the ceiling so that it touches the spot on your mirror. Why can't you just do that properly? And it's like, obviously, it's not about the household chores, right? The household chores are just activating the inner dynamics or the emotions within us that are unsettled, and they're reminding us of the sort of deeper conflicts or challenges that we have in our relationship. But it's like household chores are the thing that we manage kind of all day, every day. And so they're the space that sort of reveals oneself to each other, so to speak. Or, same thing with the kids or the other things, right? And so it's like, if we look at that, we go, well, what's the core thing? Like if I get upset, I'm in big trouble. Because, my critical thinking shuts down, my prefrontal cortex basically goes dormant, brainstem gets activated, limbic system, goes nuts, which is the emotional center of our brain. And then when we're in anger, what a lot of people don't notice, if we feel angry or any fear-based state, such as, anxiety or unworthiness or fear or shame or guilt, like when we're in those emotions, we don't have access to critical thinking or creative thinking or intuition, because those brain centers, they kind of go to sleep, right? And so it's like, if I'm trying to go into conflict resolution, or find a way to, find common ground with somebody, whether it's my significant other or my business partner or somebody I work with, I don't have that, like my physical ability is limited to do that if I'm in a fear-based state, if I'm not in the right emotional state. And so a lot of us, we don't even know what we're feeling. Like when I ask the average person, hey, what are you feeling right now? They're like, I'm okay, I'm fine. Kind of like what my answer used to be. And they're obviously in distress. Right. And it's like, we can see that in other people where, you ask our friends, or we ask our significant other, our kids, like, hey, are you okay? What's going on? And a lot of times they don't share because maybe they don't want to share. They don't feel safe. But a lot of times they're not sharing because they actually don't know that they're in a bad place to the degree in which they're there. And so if that's there, and I act from that place, we're going to have an argument. We're gonna battle at some level, right? We may not physically hit each other like I used to do with people, but we're gonna be passive aggressive, or we're gonna, say, snide comments that are clearly hurtful, and we know they're hurtful when we say them in the moment, but we can't get ourselves not to do it, right? Just like sometimes we can't get ourselves to not eat the ice cream, and it's like, if we can't control ourselves, then it's going to be very hard to elevate relationship. If we can develop emotional capacity, it changes the game, because the thing we know we need to do, we can get ourselves to execute on that every single time. And so instead of, becoming angry and being passive aggressive, or giving them silent treatment, or arguing, or decide what's most important is that I get my point across and that I'm right and that they obey me or they listen to me, or things like this that clearly never work. And we know they don't work because we've done them 100 times over, and it's just, ends up diminishing the relationship. As an example, it's like, if we have emotional competency, at a certain level, we can go, man, I feel a certain way. I'm going to manage that first aspect of relationship myself. And instead of getting upset or holding this resentment or feeling sorry for myself, or, feeling this insecurity, I'll make a shift. I'm going to get in touch with like the love or the compassion or the appreciation I have for this other person. And then I'm going to execute from there. And so what emotional capacity gives us the ability to do is actually execute on the things we know are best to do 90% of the time. Like, we're never going to hit it 100% of the time. We're going to miss occasionally. But the reality is, what I find, in order to create transformation, like in a relationship, you actually need like a D plus, maybe a C minus. You need to get it right, like maybe 60% of the time. Wow. And it's probably going to work. And so it's like, when we kind of understand that, like, we really need we need to hit the mark, like 70% of the time, 60% of the time, to create a true transformation. It helps us to understand how often we're actually creating an impact we often don't even realize we're creating, because of the emotions that we're in. We're not sort of accessing, empathy or the cause we're having on the other person. And so then we diminish our ability for influence. And so the more capacity we have over emotion, the more capable we are to execute on the things in which we know we could be executing on, number one. But then number two, we also go into a learning state. So we have the ability to learn new skills and tactics and tools to elevate our situations.
Man, well, and it's kind of opposite of therapy, where in therapy you're over analyzing the past and traumas and just bringing it up over and over again. You emphasize what's not working. In lots of therapy myself, it never felt like there was any kind of transformation from that emotional state. It's just, here's why the certain behavior shows up, is because of this thing that happened in the past. And you've created a system that helps kind of diffuse all that. What's the problem with that kind of thinking and that approach?
So something I learned, studying with some of the top neurologists, around, is that most traditional therapies, to your point, neurologically speaking, are actually training, conditioning, and reinforcing the very thing we're trying to transform or change. Because what happens is, like, the way if we really make it very simple, the way we train emotion from a nervous system standpoint is we simply feel them. And so the brain wants to basically find the most efficient way to do what we're asking it to do, whatever that task may be. And so it's like if we feel sad and we don't know how to recognize that, center it and shift it, then we feel sad again. We get better and better and better at feeling sad.
Mm.
Okay. And so a mentor of mine said, the awareness of a problem does not lead to the solution to the problem. And then the
Wow.
second thing that they would tell me a lot is transformation is an emotional event, not a mental event. And so
Mm.
if like in a lot of traditional therapies, we analyze what has happened in the past that was painful. Basically what we're doing is we're reactivating those painful emotions from a brain nervous system standpoint again and again and again and again and again, because we're not just talking about it at a level, we are reactivating those emotional patterns. And so we are re-experiencing those emotions. And every time we re-experience those emotions, we're strengthening those neural pathways in the brain, and those emotions get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And the nervous system gets better and better at going into a fight or flight sympathetic
Mm.
nervous system response. And it gets worse and worse at accessing a parasympathetic response, which is where we experience like love and tranquility and joy and inspiration and all the things that we aspire to. And so if we focus on the past and painful events over and over and over again, and why do we feel this way, we literally train the very things we're trying to overcome. And so the way we change the game is we acknowledge those painful emotions enough to simply know that they're active and present. Matter of fact, I tell people all the time, you don't need to know where emotions come from. We don't need to talk about the past event or the trauma from which it came. If people need, like, this are curious or want to do that, like, we can unpack it for sure. But typically that's not important for transformation. What's important is, oh, I notice I feel sad. We don't need to talk about why we feel sad, because the reasoning people give themselves for sadness isn't because of the past events, because we don't feel, the thing that happened 3 years ago. We're not experiencing that now when we remember the event from 3 years ago. What we are doing
Mm.
is training and conditioning the reflex in our nervous system today. And so if
Yeah.
we want to change the game, we got to get future focus, which is where vision comes in. It's like, let's create a clear picture of, say, the relationship we aspire to, the love we want to know, the connection we want to have, the fun things we're going to do together, the travels and the adventures that we want to, go on, the friends we want to have, the family we're going to build, and like really create the idea of what we aspire to in the future, get as clear about that as possible. Let's put our energy there, because when we put our energy on the things we aspire to, we naturally start feeling inspired, and we feel love, and we feel hopeful, and we feel faith, and we feel all these things that we really want to be the experience of our life. And then
Mm.
the second piece is, learning how to access those emotions now. Because if we can access joy right now today, and we can do that a little bit more tomorrow, and we can, add another minute the next day, the more we feel joyful, the more we're going to feel joyful. The more we feel joy, the more we train joy. And so in my opinion, it's like backwards, right? In terms of how a lot of people are taught or try to go about transforming themselves and their relationship in their life, is there's so much focus on the past and why they feel the way they feel, which just exacerbates the very thing they want to change. And so the way
Mm.
we flip that is we go, hey, let's get clear on who we want to be, who we want
Yeah.
to become, what we want to create, the life we want to have, the relationships we want to have in our life. And then the most important question, in my opinion, is how will we feel when it's here? I feel joyful and inspired and confident and empowered. Okay, great. Let's learn these emotional, techniques, tactics, tools, techniques, and strategies so that I can recognize how I feel, learn to center the nervous system, and activate those emotions right now so I can leverage them to create that vision of the future that I have. Because that's really the first step, in my opinion, to healing, is retraining the neural pathways in the brain, which then gives us access to the emotions that we want to experience. And that gives us leverage on ourselves to take the actions that we need to take to produce new and different results.
Because the emotion produces the action. And I think we have actions that we regret because we haven't mastered our emotions, or at least gotten in touch with them. So the big thing with vulnerability, I mean, in relationships, how does this play in? Like, how do you, I mean, like, what if you're just having an off day and you're just grumpy? I mean, how do you handle that?
Yeah. So in my opinion, it's like we never just have an off day, you know? Something occurred that we may not have realized, didn't show up on our radar,
Mm.
that played like a trigger, which turned on a light switch. is how I kind of think about it. And so like it could be a smell, it could literally be anything. It could be a smell in the air. It could be something someone said to us. It could be something we saw on TV or heard on the radio, or, I heard about, my kid did something that I'm a little disappointed in, or who knows what it is. Like something happens out in our outside world or environment, most likely. And then that trigger event activates or turns on certain patterns in our self, right? In our neural pathways in the brain. And it's like a trigger shows up, activates our nervous system. And then what people call bad days, now I feel overwhelmed, or I feel stress, or I feel anxiety, or I get caught in a fear-based emotion. And so, we may not pick up on, well, what was the thing that truly activated that particular, pattern dynamic within ourselves. But again, we don't need to know what those triggers are. What we do need to know is, like, upon waking, as I always, like, I train everybody in the beginning, I go, what'd you wake up to this morning? And like, even if you just ask yourself, right? Or like I ask another person, like, hey, what'd you wake up to this morning? It's like most people don't remember. And it's like 2 PM, or like, by like 11 a.m. They're like, what do you mean? What did I wake up to? Like, they just get up and they go. And so instead of like getting up and going and grabbing the cell phone, or, scrolling your email or looking at Facebook, like, put that away. And instead, like, wake up and go, how do I feel? What emotion is present for me right now? And if you feel a little anxious, the first 5 or 10 minutes should be, let's get ourselves aligned with the vision of life we want to create and the day we want to have, so that we start managing emotion as opposed to letting the emotions just drive us.
And you woke up breathing this morning. Maybe you could talk about your breathing exercise, because you start pretty much every morning with some kind of breath work, right?
Yeah, first thing, like, and my new thing is, like, I think we talked about this in our session. You're like, maybe you should do some nasal flushing. I was like, great. So now I wake up and I go to the bathroom. And then the second thing I do is I'll flush out my sinuses, because I found it actually helps me breathe more easily, because I like to only breathe in and out through my nose if I can. And then I'll sit down and I do 3 rounds of breathing. Like, I'll check in and I'll be like, well, how do I feel? And it's amazing, because it's like, even though I train as much as I do, I would say at least half the time, or more than half the time, I don't wake up in a good place. Like, I wake up and I feel some sort of stress, some kind of anxiety or overwhelm, or, or I'm like a little disappointed about something, or like something like that is there probably 60% of the time, which there's a nervous system reason for that, which we can discuss here in a minute if it's helpful.
Oh, yeah.
So then once I notice that, as I go, okay, great, that's where I am. I'll do my breathing, and I do 3 rounds of pretty intense breathing, sometimes 4, where I'll just breathe like strong, deep breath in through my nose, like, and then a strong, deep breath out, like all the way out. And then I'll like completely fill my lungs, with air 100%, where I couldn't even take in any more air. And I'll basically count those rounds, and I'll do 30 to 40 of those rounds. Basically what I do is I breathe with that kind of intensity until I feel like my head's a little tingly, or like my fingertips feel a little tingly. And then I'll exhale all my air out, and then I'll hold my breath, and I have a little stopwatch just to kind of gamify it. And I'll hold my breath as long as I can with all the air out of my lungs. And then once I feel that initial like hunger to breathe, I'm not trying to stress it, right? If I feel like my diaphragm start to spasm, that the goal isn't to hold my breath as long as I can. It's like, how long can I hold my breath so as comfortably as possible? And then once I notice that hunger for breathing, I'll take a deep, deep breath in, 1 deep breath in, and then I'll hold at the top. And then I'll hold that breath again for as long as I can. And then as soon as I kind of have that initial hunger to breathe, I'll go straight into kind of the same thing. And I'll do that anywhere between 2 and 4 rounds, depending on how I'm feeling or how much time I have. And this is something I did with my Qigong master, years and years ago. He taught us these breath techniques to optimize energy and what he called chi flow in the body. And it's amazing, because after I do that breath, 90% of the time I feel awesome. Like, I feel joyful, I feel inspired, I feel lit up, my brain's all tingly. And like, so the first thing I do in my morning is like, I shift my state. And then after I sort of physiologically activate myself, then I make sure I align myself emotionally and mentally for the day. Because if I don't do that, then as soon as I get going, whatever thing I might be concerned about is just going to be right there waiting for me if I don't name what I'm going to do instead.
And if breathing doesn't work, you always have a cold plunge you can go jump into. That slaps you out of it.
There you go. That's phase 2.
So let's talk about the the big risks that people have if they don't learn how to manage their emotions. What happens in relationships?
So I think it's like two things I see occur for people that they don't even realize is happening, and I call it the ghost in the machine, where it's like all of us have conditioning throughout our lifetime, and a lot of people don't realize it, but emotional conditioning actually started, around the end of the first trimester of pregnancy when we were, in the womb of our mother. Our nervous system was being formed. And then if mom felt sad or angry, well, her hormones were going on. Like that literally was the experience of our being, sadness and anger. So like our nervous system starts getting these like epigenetic imprints, when we're literally developing in the womb, pattern conditioning so that we're ready to kind of manage our environment. It's basically like codes that we're receiving, so that when we're born, it's like we are equipped to manage our environment. So like my environment was pretty hostile. And so I got a very different like code, if you will, when I was in the womb of my mother. And then in my first years of development, before I could ever speak, there was an emotional language still going on because your nervous system still feels joy, still feels sad, it still feels anger, it still feels fear. Like all those experiences are going on in a person's nervous system. We're just not able to call it sadness or joy because we don't have language yet. The thoughts aren't occurring yet because thought requires language. Like you and I, we probably think mainly in English, but like you meet somebody who's from Japan and they think in Japanese, right? So they needed language in order to think. And so many people, they try to sort of think their way out of emotion, but it doesn't work because emotions are actually regulating the mind. Emotions actually direct and define the thinking. And so what happens is if we're not aware of the emotions we feel and we're not in touch with or sensitive to those emotional pattern dynamics that exist inside us, they become what I call the ghost in the machine, where they are predetermining through our thinking every choice and decision that we'll ever make. And so for most people, they think they're making like a conscious choice or a rational choice or an intellectual choice, but they're not. Like what is beneath the surface in the unconscious self for most people doesn't have to be unconscious. With the right training, we can gain access to it and we can actually train it and recondition that reality. But if we don't have access to those emotions and basically take the time to really become aware and sensitive to them and then condition them to work on our behalf, then we basically have preconditioning that becomes a ghost in the machine that predetermines every choice, decision, and action we'll ever take. And every person at some point in time has wrestled with this, but not known what to do about it because like somebody goes, oh, I want to lose weight, but they just can't get themselves to eat the food they know they should be eating. Well, it's because that ghost in the machine is predetermining what they're going to eat. Right? Like literally to that minute detail. Or it's like our emotions as it pertains to relationship predetermines who you're gonna pick, who you're gonna be friends with, who you're not gonna be friends with. Right. So like I used to say, and I'm careful of this because like 80% of my clients are women because they tend to be a little bit more understanding around why emotions are important, than men. But we can all develop the capacities, right? And matter of fact, when I worked with he was just under the CEO. He's a global VP at Dell. And he was only second to Michael Dell himself when I was, coaching and training him. And when he developed high levels of emotional capacity, his career took off. Like he even, grew beyond where he was. And he was kind of at the top of his game when he's in Dell. And the reason he started working with me was because he was like, Joey, I don't understand. Everybody at work loves me, but my wife, like she literally hates me. And I was like, oh no, everybody at work hates you too. Your wife just tells you that she hates you. You're in charge.
He's honest.
Like you're in charge of their salary and their bonuses. And so he had like a secret survey done with this guy that he trusted to ask people what they thought of him. And everybody despised this guy. And he's like, Joey, everybody hates me. And I was like, yeah. I was like, you're emotionally incompetent, so you don't even know that they don't like you. I said, imagine what kind of influence you could have if you own that space of leadership and you actually, managed impact differently. And so us working with him and his wife, like he thought he had this great relationship. He didn't understand why his wife didn't like him, but like his emotions were dictating actions. And so it was really getting in the way. And so like for myself, I used to say like women are crazy, you know, and always preface this because like I said, a lot of my clients are women. And I said, listen, I don't actually believe that, but I did at the time because it was like I had these erratic relationships and there was always yelling at each other and just outrageous behavior. And I'd be like, what is going on? But then I realized like, wait a minute, three aspects of relationship. There's me, there's a relationship, there's the other person. I'm the common denominator here. And, you know, I've been with these, you know, 4 different relationships. I'm picking bad. Right. And so like my picker was like not aligned to pick well. And my emotional patterns and that which I was comfortable with and familiar with was actually sort of like dialed in for dysfunction. Wow. And so once I understood that, I could rewire those inner ghosts in my machine, my inner pattern dynamics. And then I taught myself to literally be attracted to a different type of woman. Right. Like somebody who had emotional intelligence and somebody who, you know, had a different moral constitution, somebody that wasn't anchored in what I would consider addictive behaviors and things like this. And it was interesting because at first I wasn't interested. I was like, they're so boring. Because my picker was broke, you know, but fast forward to today, like I have this amazing relationship with this awesome woman who would not have given me the time of day 20 years ago. Matter of fact, Caitlin even says to me, she's like, I'm glad we met when we did because I would not have liked you.
I no doubt about that. She is very selective. Well, and so one thing you were going to share with us is why we wake up with feeling like crap. So many of us do. I mean, it was interesting. I was at Genius Network and Joe Polish. He said, "Look, in the morning, it takes me a while just to feel good." And so I think so many high achievers, you know, there's always something we haven't done, something we haven't accomplished. Is that the ghost in the machine? Is that what's driving our subconscious brain, or what's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think there's 2 things. Like one, we have the ghost in the machine, right? Our pattern dynamics that are driving our choices, decisions, and actions. We adjust our pattern dynamics. We redefine our choices, decisions, and actions. And we become unstoppable because like you can motivate yourself to literally do anything if we're willing to train the capacity within ourselves. Then the second aspect is we just have this thing called a nervous system in a body that has been developing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so what a lot of people don't understand is we actually have a fear-based disposition, like every human being does. And so our like primitive brain is basically, you know, it's basically, it has one job. It's like, my job is to identify a threat and eliminate the threat. And that is literally all it cares about. So another way to say that is our brain has a negative bias. And there's no way to change that negative bias. Like we're all gonna live with that because your brain is instinctually designed and conditioned to basically optimize for survival, right? Like I was looking out the window this morning and I saw like a deer walking on the trail outside my window. And I was like, oh, that is cool. Look at that deer up there. And then all of a sudden it got spooked and this thing ran across a mountain like as fast as I've ever seen anything go. And it's like, you know how deer bounce and he just covered probably a mile in like nothing, right? It was fast to watch. And then he just stops and then he looks back at where he, you know, or she like ran from and was like, what was that? And there was nothing there. It just got spooked. Right. And so it's like, we're all operating that way where it's like our brain is going, where's the threat? 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 Like it's constantly asking that question. And so it has a negative bias and then it goes, okay, how do I eliminate that threat? And its disposition is to eliminate it by fight, flee, or freeze, right? Like that's where we go. And so it's not that there's anything wrong with us. None of us are broken. It's just our brain and our nervous system is designed to go, where's the threat and how do I eliminate it? You know, negative bias. So if we understand that, we can trick it. Right? We can go, okay. So like for me, one way I tricked my nervous system into leveraging the negative bias, like as it pertains to entrepreneurship is I basically taught my brain to not like anything to remain the same for very long. Right. And so if change is happening, like if my business is consistently growing, or I'm meeting new people. It's like, oh, that I've taught my brain that that's survival. That means that I'm okay. That's safety. And having things stay the same for too long is the threat. Like I've taught my brain to sort of identify things that way. But even if we do that, the initial sort of radar is always going to be, where's the problem and how do I get rid of it, right? That negative bias. So if we understand that, we can implement some key things to basically shut down that negative bias so that we're operating from a better place.
Man, I love that because kind of the if just to summarize on the key principles: emotional resilience, emotional access, emotional centering. That poor deer, by the way, Joey, you got some big old mountain lions out there, and that deer could have smelled that little mountain lion that
It's
could have devoured.
100% possible.
Joey sent a video of these gorgeous mountain lions. They're huge at his house. So
They were just like literally just sitting on my patio. Like they're just hanging out.
just chilling. But yeah. So emotional resilience, emotional access, emotional centering, and then the four requirements that you write about is stop doing something you're currently doing. If you're looking for relationship transformation, business challenges, start doing something you have not done before. That's where you talk about, you don't want to be on the same level. You always want to be in growth mode, and then make vision outcome the primary priority, be future focused, and then be afraid and take aligned action despite fear. And so that's the word courage. And it summarizes your life, because even when you're in India and you're essentially like there's just rotting bodies of people who've starved to death on the streets there. And I mean, you learn how to meditate in a very rough environment, one of the worst environments imaginable, and to tolerate the smells that you probably never thought you'd ever have to witness in your life, just being there, which is pretty amazing. But I think this all, if we look at relationships, how much of relationships comes down to that ability to confront and ability to have the courage necessary to make changes.
Yeah, I think courage is a great word to use. And what I find is most important is that a person has the courage to believe in something different than what's currently happening. And when you've been in a dynamic for maybe a year or 10 years, or a lot of my clients come to me and they've been married 25 years or something, and they're ready to divorce, like that's where a lot of people, would come to me, where it's like, hey, we've tried everything else and you're our last resort. So like, no pressure, but if this doesn't work, we're getting divorced, and, our kids are going to live in two separate houses and all that kind of stuff. Or, business partners will come to me and they're trying to dissolve a company and they're fighting. They're about to or they maybe are already suing each other and this kind of thing. And it's like, hey, can you help us get aligned? Like that's kind of where I got my start, was dealing with, extenuating circumstances. And it's like the first step is having the courage to, number one, name the outcome that you really aspire to, or the relationship you really want to have, the vision for relationship, and give yourself permission to believe in that possibility. And if a person can bring me those, like the willingness to do those two things, and we can always help somebody like construct the vision and show you how to train belief, because belief isn't something that's either there or not there. It's really something that we train and we develop and we cultivate, right? It's like entrepreneurs know this very well. Like we've got to find a way to maintain that belief in where we're going and what we're going to create. Sometimes when years go by and it seems like it's further away than it was, years ago, and that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden it happens, right? And so those are the first two steps, or most important components of creating an amazing relationship, is like, get clear on the picture of the relationship you want, have the courage to name it, have the courage to believe that it's going to happen, and that future reality is not only a possibility, but it's highly likely for you. And there's going to be all kinds of energy pulling you in the other way, and doubts and reasons why not, and the history and the past to look at and all that kind of stuff. But it's possible. And then the second piece is go, hey, this is my relationship. I'm not 50% responsible for this relationship. I'm 100% responsible for the relationship. Because at the end of the day, kind of like I noticed with the women in my life at a time, right? It was like, oh, I'm choosing these women. Like this relationship is 100% my responsibility because I picked them. And then I showed up in this relationship in a particular way that nurtured and propagated these behaviors that are not healthy or beneficial. And what I need to do is change who I am being in the relationship and pay attention to those four things we put in a relationship, own those four things fully, the emotional energy we put in, the thoughts we put in, the words that we speak, the actions we take. And it's like if a person just owns their side of the relationship and learns the skills to do that really, really well, then 90% of the time, they don't even need to try to get their other person to change, whether it's an employee or a coworker or a boss or a significant other or a child. They'll just start behaving differently in reaction to the new stimulus or the new space in which you're holding. And if we get good at that, like you can transform any relationship. But the great part is when it comes to relationship dynamics, like if we train those skills with one relationship, we're gonna develop the reflexes within ourselves of those skills. And so every other relationship gets better as well. Because the bad habits of relationship, we stop those and then we stop them in other relationships also.
Man, it's so powerful, and it's so much wisdom that you've shared today. One of the things that you've offered is a chance for people to access relationship alchemy, and we've got a link in the show notes. And there's some cool bonuses that Joey's throwing in. So for those of you who love this, I mean, you guys absolutely will want to pick up a copy of this book. But if you go to joeyklein.com and spelled like Calvin Klein, KLEIN.com, and you'll be able to pick up some of his training, his speaking, his books, the Inner Matrix System. Those are all, we'll put links to the show notes there. And Joey, as far as like, any final words or what you'd like to see as your future outcome, because you're such a vision-based human, what do you want to have happen with relationship alchemy?
For me, it's like, everything I've ever created. I was just speaking with, with Garrett actually. And I was like, I was looking at like Instagram or something. And I'm like, I got like 780 followers. He's like, yeah, but that's awesome because you did it the right way. And I was like, what do you mean I did it the right way? He's like, well, you cared about people, you transformed lives. You've transformed like tens of thousands of people's lives, probably hundreds of thousands of people's lives. You created the like valid system that truly makes a difference. And now you're going out and wanting to tell people about it at a bigger scale, as opposed to like marketing and telling people this thing exists or writing a book so you can maybe figure something out to sell. And so, and so that's like how I've created everything is like my clients have come to me and said, man, would you write Relationship Alchemy? People have been asking me to write this book for 5 years now. We've been teaching, relationship courses and things like this and truly changing lives. And so for me at this point, that's all it's about is I just see what's out there and I see so many people want to create a difference in their life and in particular their relationships. And it's like, if they go find, a traditional, therapist as an example, they're probably going to make matters worse. And at best, nothing's going to change. And that's so disheartening for me. Or they're, going to find most likely they're not going to find something that's going to make a difference for them. And I'm just so grateful to my mentors because they were there when I really needed something and they were able to produce results for me. And I could have just as easily, and I have, tried many things out over the years that just didn't work or did make matters worse for myself. And so for me, I just want to make sure that people that want to change, that they have access to it.
Yeah.
Is really the name of the game.
I love that. Well, make sure you guys find Joey on Instagram. Even though he has 780 more followers than Reagan does, he is. Let's blow him up. I'm gonna get on there. Don't worry, Joey. Garrett keeps telling me the same. I'm like, I'll get there. Well, this has been phenomenal. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your friendship, and I really appreciate the work that you do And for those of you who love the show, make sure you give us a like, give us a great review, and then make sure you find Joey. Go to joeyklein.com, and you're going to see some pretty phenomenal things coming up here with Relationship Alchemy. Joey, thanks again for being on the show.
Absolutely. This has been awesome, man. Thanks so much.
You got it.